Just a little agenda to kind of explain everything I'm going to talk about. So first I'm going to talk about my background. Then I'm going to talk about finding your ikigai, which is a Japanese thing that means like finding your purpose. Balancing pros and cons, getting educated, mentors, projects, landing the job, transition anxiety, and then the final stage, fulfillment and reexamination. So these are kind of stages of, career transition, basically. So first, let me tell you more about myself. So I was actually born in Nigeria. My parents immigrated when I was 4 years old with me in 1995. Actually, my dad came a year earlier. They came on student visas to get their PhDs in physics. So you can guess my parents were a bit of the tiger parent variety. So I grew up actually really enjoying a lot of creative stuff. I did a lot of drawing, writing. I like doing other things. But I was lucky that my dad actually bought me a computer in the 90s, and we had like all those old Windows operating systems with that crazy horrible phone noise when you're trying to connect. So I think that kind of gave me an early love for technology, having access to like video games and my computer and just playing around online. And I even remember getting a Palm Pilot in elementary school and being the first kid to show everyone how to install games and play illicitly in class. So yeah, so when I went to college, I was torn a lot between the arts and more technology related careers, which is why I went to a liberal arts college in Ohio called Oberlin College. And I ended up going into visual arts, which I'll explain a little bit more why later. And yeah, I graduated in 2013. And so that was shortly after the housing crisis, and there weren't a lot of job opportunities. I was thinking to get into web design and was applying to quite a lot of jobs, but there were no real opportunities. And I accepted a job at the college being an art technical coordinator. So I was basically helping students learn about how to use Adobe Photoshop and Illustrator and different like design softwares. Yeah, and I left that job in 2015, and that was pretty much when I started trying to get a job in software engineering, because I was teaching myself to code during those 2 years as well. And then I wrote a book about it, which is on the left-hand side there, that's the book cover. My book is called Foot in the Door: My Self-Taught Journey to Becoming a Software Engineer. Oops, I'm so sorry. Okay. All right, so let's talk about the ikigai. The ikigai is, like I said, a Japanese concept. It's the reason for being. And you can see this chart is pretty complex. So we have what we normally think of as passion, which is, what you love and the yellow and green circles. And the thing about passion that a lot of people don't talk about is sometimes we can have a feeling of satisfaction, but also a feeling of uselessness, because we're not looking at those other two circles of like what you can be paid for and what the world needs, especially what the world needs. And I think that was something I was struggling with a lot with visual arts, was like, not having those other parts of the circle. And that was why I was kind of figuring it out in college of like not just in college, but after college, of just like, what is my ikigai? Like, I know what I like, I know this is fun, but is it really the right thing to pursue? And so you have the other circles, like if you're doing what you love and what the world needs, then you might have a feeling of delight and usefulness, but no wealth. And then if you have what you can be paid for and what the world needs, you might have excitement and complacency, but a sense of uncertainty. And then what you can be paid for or what you're good at, that's your profession. And you might be very comfortable, but having a feeling of emptiness. So I think it's really hard to find your ikigai. I think this is kind of like a lifelong pursuit in many cases. The whole like, what do you want to be when you grow up? I feel like they start asking you this when you're like a little kid and you don't really know. And even as an adult, you don't always know. So that's why I think it's super important to explore your interests and really like consider all the possibilities, and also remember that like what you're paid for, if you have a good work-life balance, you can still pursue the things you love and the things you're good at. They don't have to all come from your day job, so to speak. And that work-life balance is good anyway, because you don't want to, if you don't have the ikigai, you're going to get a big toll on your health if you're just working all the time and you're not getting all of these circles met, because we do work a lot of hours. So all right, whoops. All right, so I'm going to be interspersing my PowerPoint with quotes from my book. So this quote is from chapter 3. I'm not going to like read everything word for word, just kind of summarize, but feel free to read the whole quote if you want. So I was really like, I took school seriously, you know, the whole tiger parent thing. I really cared about my grades. And, you know, it felt like a grind, and I kind of assumed that work would be different. But my first job, it really also felt like a grind. And so that was like the first kind of like alarm signal in my head, like, is this right? Like, is this how I should be feeling? And so, yeah, I'll talk more about that. All right, so what might be preventing people from pursuing their ikigai, or their passion, you know, a little bit of both. So you might think you can't make a career out of it, or you can't risk leaving your stable job. You become too tied up in daily grind, lost sight of what makes you happy. You're told in an early age a career wasn't a viable option. For me, with the arts, even web design and some of the stuff that I'm still doing now, my parents not knowing anything about it, they really wanted me to go into science, because they were like, we know that, you know, we know like what physics is, we know what science is, we can teach this to you, and we want you to like do a career that we can help you with. And so they weren't super encouraging me to do these things either, which made it more difficult. And so with programming, aside from my parents kind of being anxious, I was also really nervous about the classes, because the first class I had was, you know, the Intro to Java programming class. It was like the first class to the major. And I was like, okay, you know, this is tough, but I think I can handle it. The problem was that I had these exams that were really difficult. And I was told that, you know, oh, the next class, like exams are going to be so much harder. Like even the take home test that, you know, I had already taken me a lot of time, like this is going to be so much harder. And I was like, man, like, I don't think I can juggle this with my arts classes. I don't know that I should keep doing this. And ultimately that intimidated me so much, and wanting to get good grades, I just ended up not taking more of those classes. So kind of going back to the ikigai again, it's just like balance pros and cons, I think, is a big part of it. You know, we all have our needs, our financial needs and our like emotional needs. And yeah, like there were so many different areas in tech that I looked into. You know, I looked into front-end development, I looked into different aspects of design with web development, and I didn't really know how broad the field was. That, you know, there's jobs where you can do like a bit of UX and a bit of front end, or there's jobs where you can do front end and a little bit of back end, or, you know, there's so many different variations. And there's some jobs where you're kind of cranking out websites very frequently, or there's other jobs where you're, you know, working on the same app for a long period of time. So really, I don't think I got a full feeling of the pros and cons in the field until I was doing it for quite a while. But that's why I say in here that, you know, switching careers, your first job may not be the one, and, you know, you may have to kind of explore and not jump to conclusions right away. So back to the whole exploring thing. Actually, in college, I had a ton of different jobs because I really didn't know what I wanted to do. So I was actually an obituary writer for a year. I was writing obituaries for the college, for the alumni. And as you can imagine, it was a little depressing, although not always. Sometimes it was inspirational. I also was a photographer for a while. I interviewed people around campus for different articles. I was a dance instructor for middle school students, and I assisted with the Oberlin College archives, where we had a lot of like history about the school. And I was even training to be a guide through like one of the historical buildings on campus. Yeah, I had a lot of different things that kind of helped me figure out like, where do I want to be? So once we figure that out, once we're like, okay, we got what we know what we want, or I'm trying to make this both about people in general and myself, just to, you know, give some little advice. There's kind of getting educated, right? So, and I think we've got Pluralsight, we've got LinkedIn Learning, we've got, you know, our own platform, Wiki and whatnot. I think this can be a little bit overwhelming too, because we see so many resources. We don't always know like where to begin, or like what education we should seek outside of online learning. And this was definitely the case for me after graduation, and knowing that I wanted to learn JavaScript, I wanted to be a web developer. I didn't really know like what the best resources were. I knew that I had my access to the college resources. I had like Safari Books and Lynda and all these different platforms that I was able to use. But I didn't really have a lot of confidence that even after learning all these things, I was going to be able to get a job. So, you know, it's important to kind of figure out what resources work for you, especially with your learning style, and also kind of like have a little bit more context. Like that's something I really wish that I had, which I talk about next with like mentors as well. So this is just a quote. Like I mentioned, Safari Books and Lynda. For me, the learning style piece, Lynda having all these video tutorials actually ended up being less helpful for me, because when I was trying to write code and like playing the video back again and again, or having to pause the video, open my code, then close my code, open the video, like there was just a lot of back and forth. It was so much easier to use Safari Books for that, which is, if you're not familiar, it's an ebook platform. And they had so many great books about you know, web development. All right, so I think the mentor piece and the learning piece really tie together, because when you have both, you're able to make sure that you're learning the things you want to learn and that you're kind of going in the right direction. You have a little bit of reassurance. But I think there are a few like pitfalls people can run into with this. One that I think I definitely struggled with was I was kind of cold calling and cold emailing alumni who were in the field in web development, and a lot of them weren't responding to me. And I was like messaging people on LinkedIn, and I was just like, oh, like, why isn't no one responding? Like, why is no one helping me? Like, this is so frustrating. But looking back now, I realized that some of the people who were my mentors weren't really the people I realized they were my mentors at the time. Some of them weren't even web developers. They were just people who talked to me a lot about what I wanted to do and gave me ideas and kind of gave me kind of more context and more understanding. So it's just like kind of looking out for mentors in surprising places, but also thinking about having more kind of casual mentors, like a larger group of mentors, because then first of all, you get different perspectives that way. And also you're not putting a lot of pressure on one person to give you everything you need. So Jim was a great mentor I had in college. At the time, I really just thought of him as a friend. He also had a lot of different jobs in his life. He worked at a pizza shop. He was part of a crew on a yacht. He even worked a graveyard shift converting film audio for airplanes. So really, like, he had a huge, broad set of experience in his life, and he was always willing to go for a coffee with me and just talk about stuff like that. And it was super helpful, because, you know, at the time I was like in my early 20s and he was in his early 30s. So he had a lot more life experience that he could draw upon to help me. All right, so projects. So once you've got some education under your belt and you feel confident enough, you can build some projects. And this was the next thing as well. I decided to build several games, which is what I was really passionate about as a kid. The game I built was called Hnefatafl. It's actually an ancient Viking board game. My husband was actually writing a book at the time, and he wanted his character to learn about military strategy. And he discovered this game, and he was like, this is going to be cool. Like, if my character learns through this game. I'd never heard of the game before, but I became fascinated with it. And there weren't a lot of good examples online of how to play, or even just being able to play it online. So I decided to build that as my big like final project for myself. You know, it's not just software engineers who have portfolios. Writers have portfolios. You're, you know, sharing blog posts, articles. You want to like have examples of your work. Same with designers. You know, you might have mock-ups or posters or graphic design, whatever you're doing. You know, have a portfolio of that as well. And kind of the way I usually see is like you build projects, then you get some sort of freelance work or part-time work, or some kind of thing that you can also add to your resume, and then that tends to lead to full-time jobs. So I felt so good when I finished this project, because at the time I didn't have a lot of confidence, and being able to put it out there and share it with the world and getting, you know, positive feedback was like a huge boost in my confidence. And it's still a project I'm really proud of today. All right, so once we've got the project, then it's landing the job. For me, that was definitely stressful, especially because some of the software engineering interviews are particularly difficult with like whiteboard tests and things like that. Um, One thing that helped me a lot when I was preparing was gaining insight from Glassdoor. I was able to look up like, well, what questions did these people ask? Like, what kind of interview style do they have? Which is really important because I think a lot of interviews can be vastly different. I've had interviews where they gave me a take-home project, other interviews where they gave me an online test, other interviews where they just talked to me on the phone, and there was no way of knowing until I had the interview that that was going to be the case. Also important to remember, not all hiring managers and recruiters are 100% honest, so you should definitely do your own research or even talk to someone who works there just to be sure that it's a good fit. And of course, you know, looking out for red flags. I mean, I had a job once where they told me in the interview, like, you know, are you okay working like lots of hours? Like, we don't have, like, he basically said, like, we don't have a great work-life balance here. And I was like, I don't know. At the time, it seemed like it was okay because he was saying that like other times it's slow, but other times it's really intense. Um, and I kind of wish I'd like taken that feedback a bit more seriously at the time. So this is a little bit more about the whiteboard test. It's pretty challenging because we're used to writing code on computers, but when you write code on a whiteboard, it just feels very unnatural. So that piece I was really preparing for a lot just to make sure that I was comfortable with it. All right, and then transition anxiety. I suffered from this so much. I was really, really stressed out when I got my first sort of freelance job as a developer. I was not getting a lot of consistent communication with the team, and I never knew when they were going to give me a project, and this gave me so much anxiety. As I was constantly saying, like, what if this, what if that, you know, what if I hit my coworkers, what if they put me on a bad project, never knowing when they're going to contact me. And I think part of this is that when we're working as something we enjoy, something we're passionate about, then, you know, the fear of failing is a lot higher than if it's something that you're just sort of lukewarm about. So keeping that transition anxiety in check can be challenging sometimes. So yeah, this is just what I was saying earlier. Like I never knew when I was going to get an email, and this guy was telling me, oh, you know, I'll send you an assignment in a couple hours. I ended up like staying up that whole day, like into the evening, waiting for this assignment that never came, and just having so much anxiety, being paralyzed. Like, you know, that was not good. And so with that is mental health tips. These things really help me, and I just think it's really important to be in a stable place when you're going to do a career transition. I kind of learned that the hard way, and I think it's especially true with COVID-19. You know, everything's just more stressful than usual by a long shot. So got to take care of ourselves. And two exercises or practices that have really helped me. And the first one is called mindful self-compassion. It's basically about how to treat yourself as you treat like your friends and family. Like, you know, we don't beat on our friends and family nearly as much as we beat on ourselves. Like our inner voice tends to be a lot less friendly. So it's kind of learning how to be compassionate towards ourselves. And then neurosensory exercises are really good for grounding ourselves. It's kind of like meditation, but it's a little bit easier to approach. Irene Leon is really good. She has free classes about how to do some of these neurosensory exercises that I recommend. So yeah, so any career transition, you're going to have a spike in anxiety. And it's easy to get fixated on your performance when you don't have a lot of validation at the beginning. So I just think it's really important to do something that relaxes you, and not just something that is like a TV show or video game, because that doesn't fully relax you, just distracts you. All right, so we're nearing the end. At this point, you know, I've got my job. I've kind of started to figure things out, but there was still a lot of re-examination. My first job was at a startup called Label Insight, and it was a good job, and I learned a lot. But then I moved to DC, and everything kind of started all over again. I was like, okay, the market here is really different. The types of jobs are different. Like, it took a lot of change before I found a good fit for me. And so that's why I think it's important to, you know, not stop asking yourself the question of like, is this a good spot for me? You know, what are my needs? What are my priorities? And, you know, not be afraid of like re-examining these things, even if it's a little scary. And, you know, keeping a journal can be helpful. Even if you just write it in it like once a few months, or just kind of stream of consciousness, how you're feeling, it's helpful. And so I wanted to wrap up the presentation with a story about another developer, someone who also did a career transition, but very different from mine. So Ashley, she was in her 30s and she was a physical therapist. She had really done well in physical therapy, actually. She was a manager already, so she'd been promoted, but she did not like being a manager and she was no longer happy with her career. And so it was really a tough place for her. She felt like a failure, like she maybe shouldn't have even gone to graduate school. But she decided in her, time outside of work to start like looking into web development and ended up getting a data entry job, which wasn't really what she wanted originally. She wanted web development, but she just didn't have enough time to do all the training. So she hoped she could do some training on the job. So the data entry was actually for a big name company, which actually ended up, even though she wasn't happy with the data entry, the big name got her a new role a few months later. And because of that, then in the new role, she had more developers, more kind of people who were willing and able to train her. And that was kind of how she finally got into a place where she was on her way to becoming a web developer. So I also should say, so it wasn't something where they just like trained her and she didn't have to do anything. Like she definitely had to like, be, in her own words, very annoying to get the feedback and get the help that she needed, and insisting on the developer's attention. I think that's important too, because when we're in a job, everyone's kind of distracted and busy with stuff. So if you've got a need, you got to kind of reach out for it.